Welcome back, everybody, to the Victory World World Cup, where we are now getting into game 3 of our stream, which is Guatemala versus the USA. But this time, I'm now joined back with my colleague Ben Kiriakou. Ben, how you doing,
Yes,
sir?
I'm doing very well. It's always tough to know which way to point when you're trying to see it. It was always very. But David, we've had some great matches so far, and both yourself and Maeve had already pointed out two leftovers Kyogre coming out already in this day. I don't know if we'll see a third or not, but really good to see this adaptation to Kyogre and how it was played, and especially in the matchup that we had in the previous game where it was against that Calyrex Ice Rider that usually is a Pokemon that just steamrolls. Seeing something sitting on the field effectively steamrolling the other way round is quite interesting to see.
Yeah, it was. It was an excellently played match by Christian, especially versus, even though Anton had his Trick Room matchup that he wanted, he kept getting it up, but Kai was just so bulky, sat there for the entirety of both game 1 and 2. But we are now going to get into our third game of the session, which is between Nathan Ortiz and Carl Shotsberger. So we're going to look at the group at the moment, which is Group 8, where we've also got Malaysia and Ireland there. And we can see from the group stages in week 1 that US are coming into this week 2 on a draw versus Ireland, and Guatemala are actually coming off a loss versus Malaysia. So Malaysia in a strong position, but Guatemala definitely need this win this week. So Ben, what are you seeing when you see these teams?
Well, I think it's a really great result for Ireland. Actually, I have to give them the shout out. Playing against a team as strong as the United States and being able to get a draw, that's great, and it does make the sort of a team dynamic, match dynamic, quite interesting, because once you've got a draw and between two teams and you've only got 2 spots for that top placement, it becomes really difficult to make sure that if you're either Ireland or the United States, that you are getting to that second slot. Assuming if we do that, Malaysia carry on winning, if they draw as well, and one of the United States and Ireland are able to win another match, it could get a little bit tricky between points scored, and then it goes down to set differences and then game differences or amount of games won. So this sort of early tie in week 1 may set us up for a bit of a tricky group into this week, and of course following the final week next week.
Certainly good. And interestingly as well, Guatemala and United States in the qualifying stages were actually both top of their own original groups. So it'll be interesting to see how, and we could see actually how it's going here, actually following into this week, how these two top teams are going to face against each other. And we can see the United States are actually up 4 wins to 0 wins against Guatemala at the moment. And it looks like it's quite a dominating wins as well.
Yeah, exactly that. I was just about to point that out there, David, with no games yet won by Guatemala. So really do hope that they can break that streak on stream and get themselves a little bit of positive momentum, because, it's technically still possible for them to come out of this match with a draw if they win their last 4 matches. And of course, there's still some quite good players on the US team that are still yet to play. And they have been using a bit of a mix of Pokemon. In fact, every restricted on both teams has been different. So we have Zekrom coming out from Ashton, which is great to see. We've got a Calyrex Ice Rider that it was against as well, coming out from Manuel. Of course, Groudon, Zekrom, Zacian and Calyrex Shadow Rider, as well as Groudon and Kyogre. So I think we kind of worked through all of the big restricted Pokemon that players tend to use in these sort of formats. So we'll have to see if the 2 players that we have facing off against each other today will be using any Pokemon or restricted Pokemon in common.
And here is our first player from Guatemala. It's Nathan Ortiz, and he's running the Groudon, Incineroar, Serena, Tapu Fini, Whimsicott, and Stakataka, which is an interesting set of Pokemon because he's actually brought Groudon twice already in this World Cup. Once versus his game in the Philippines, where he won, and also in week 1 versus Malaysia, he did lose, but he still did bring that Groudon. And this team is actually still unique, though, even though he's brought Groudon 3 times. He's still kind of been changing up a bit, but there's that one common theme, actually, throughout his 3 previous games that he's played, is that stack attacker that he's brought every week.
Indeed, and a few accomplishments as well to his name. Top 16 in the 2020 Dallas Regional Championships. Top 8 in Collinsville Regionals in 2020 also, and getting to top 32 of the NA qualifiers, or North America qualifiers, in Players Cup 4. So a mix of achievements there, both in live events as well as in the Players Cup. And of course, being from Guatemala, being able to play against US players on a fairly regular basis, both online and in live events. So we'll be used to how America tends to build their teams and play against them, having a lot of experience there. But of course, we are going to move across to our player from the United States. That's Carl Shotsberger here, who has a top 4 in the Memphis Regional Championships in 2019, which is another format that had a restricted Pokemon allowed within the rule set. And he's going to be rocking a team of also Groudon, Venusaur, Gyarados, Tapu Fini, Mimikyu, and that stack attacker.
Yeah, so we have a Groudon mirror match for everybody today, but with a little bit of a difference for the supporting cast. Both got that stack attacker, and both got that Tapu Fini, but there is that Gyarados and that Venusaur, which are going to be really crucial actually in this Sun mirror match here. And Carl's has also used Groudon previously in his week 1 versus New Zealand back in the qualifiers. He also used Groudon, which got him that win as well. But that time, that was with a Noivern. So he's progressed a little bit from this time and going maybe more of a slower route there with the stack attack and the Mimikyu. So it'd be interesting to see how these two players do end up fighting it out in this mirror match here. So let's get into team preview. I mean, you've got to be interested to see how each of these Groudons are actually trained, because both players have got trick room modes on there. So, but how slow are you going to want to make your Groudon? You're going to make it absolutely the minimum speed you can, so you make the most of it in trick room, or you can run maybe a little bit of speed, so you can make the most of some tailwind, say from the Whimsicott on whose end we got Nathan's end that we're looking from here. Whereas on Carl's end, he's got that Tapu Fini, which maybe offers some icy winds, but other than that, there's not a lot of other faster speed control other than that trick room.
No, and you tend to find certainly some teams with the Venusaur also attached to them don't tend to run so much of a positive speed control, i.e. things like Tailwind and Icy Wind, quite so much, because they have that natural speed advantage with the Venusaur that can do a lot of work, especially in this sort of matchup when you're facing a Groudon mirror match. Certainly we were talking before the match and having a look at what this matchup may look at, and if that Venusaur does carry something like Earth Power, it could potentially hit every single Pokemon on Nathan's team for super effective. So I think it's going to be quite a key component in this matchup, and certainly will be quite beneficial for Carl to bring to this match.
Absolutely, and the Gyarados is nothing to shake a stick at either. You resist both of Groudon's same type attack bonus attacks, and you've got the Intimidate for it as well, and as a water type, you're not even weak to grass either, so it's a really nice bring into this set. So let's see the leads. It is that Venusaur and the Tapu Fini over on Carl's end, so that Misty Terrain is going to get set up, so maybe not some Sleep Powder on that Venusaur, whereas on Nathan's end, we've got the Incineroar and the Ground, so very different leads here, despite fairly similar teams. But Groudon being led straight off the bat here is quite nice for Nathan, as if it's able to avoid some of those attacks, like the grass attacks from this Tapu Fini, but setting up the Sun as well, which is likely going to be on the field for maybe the entire game at this point, seeing as there's 2 Groudon. Tapu Fini isn't going to be offering too much with its water type attacks, but Tapu Fini does have a lot of other tricks up its sleeve. It's got a nice speed stat. We may see Nature's Madness. We may see even some boosting with some Calm Mind, because it is in a decent position to do so versus this fire type and this ground type here.
Yeah, indeed. And, Venusaur's got to watch out for the fake out coming out from that Incineroar, or fire moves coming out from either Incineroar or the Groudon. But once that fake out isn't in play anymore, that Venusaur's going to be able to launch big, powerful Grass Knots into Groudon, which we've seen over the years, and it definitely in the 2019 format was one of the staples in these sort of metagames. But we see the Tapu Fini not wanting to stay on the field, is going to be switching out for that Gyarados, getting that Intimidate off to both Groudon and the Venusaur, which is going to make quite a bit difference, and activating that White Herb on the Groudon. So Groudon going to be reversing its stats back to normal. Venusaur going on the defensive, going for a Protect, and Fake Out is going to land into that Venusaur, so no damage onto that this turn. But Groudon just going to be content to take advantage of the Venusaur not being able to move this turn and go for that substitute and just protect itself from any damage this turn.
Yeah, it's an excellent substitute at the moment here. You've got it into a nice position where you're threatening a lot back onto this Venusaur, which is probably, as you were saying earlier, Ben, it's could potentially have super effective attacks on everything, so you definitely want to have something to deal with that. Gyarados coming in, it is in the sun, it's not going to offer too much offensive pressure here, but Gyarados' outputs we've seen over the last week or two are running Power Whip quite often at the moment. So even in the sun matchup, it's still going to be offering a lot of damage into Groudon and, say, opposing Tapu Finis here.
Yeah, certainly is. And Venusaur not wanting to stay on the field now that substitute is up on the Groudon. Going to be switching back into Tapu Fini as Groudon just wants to preserve that substitute, go for the Protect, puts a target on its back, and then make sure it doesn't take any damage whatsoever. Gyarados going for that Power Whip you mentioned earlier, David, into the Groudon's Protect, so no damage there at all. And Flare Blitz going into the Tapu Fini, so great switch for Carl there, making sure that Tapu Fini takes that attack so well from because of its resisted hits, and just going to restore a little bit of health with that Leftovers, and we're going to end the turn fairly neutral on both parts.
We are, yeah, just definitely a game of positioning at the moment. No Pokemon has kind of been in a position where it's offering a huge amount of damage, apart from on turn one, which is kind of covered by a Fake Out. So I'm liking the plays from both ends at the moment. They're just getting into the position exactly that they want, and amazingly, Tapu Fini took that Sun boosted Flare Blitz so well, thanks to the obviously the resist and the Intimidate offered by this Gyarados too. Both are in a really nice position. I do wonder whether Gyarados' Waterfall is actually able to break a substitute on the Groudon on Nathan's end, possibly because especially as Nathan's like Incineroar's already on the field. I imagine it probably is still enough. It's interesting that he wants to risk that power up there, but here comes a Nature's Madness.
Yeah, into that Groudon substitute, which at the health range that Groudon is at the moment will be enough to fade that substitute. Interesting that Tapu Fini is going before that Gyarados, so Gyarados can follow up with a Power Whip and do so much. Oh, it's going to even knock it out. That Groudon goes down with a critical hit. That's a big piece of Nathan's puzzle that is going to be removed from the field now. Incineroar going for a parting shot, though, going to be launching into that Gyarados, dropping its attack, but I feel like Gyarados has done the work that it needed to do already. Incineroar returning to Nathan, and I wouldn't be surprised if this game was fairly short from here on out, now that Nathan doesn't have his Groudon available, and Carl definitely does.
Absolutely. That was a huge KO on Carl's end. Getting rid of the restricted that basically underpins your entire team is pretty huge for Carl, so he must be feeling pretty good, and he hit the Power Whip too. So a little bit maybe kind of catching Nathan off guard there, where we're probably used to seeing Gyarados being quite fast. Maybe it's a Dragonlance set, it's usually fast offensive, and maybe Tapu Fini's more the slower Pokemon when you look at these two. But actually Tapu Fini's speed is actually naturally faster than Gyarados, just by a little bit. So actually not too surprising, especially if these two Pokemon are quite bulky. Tapu Fini naturally outspeeds, and especially with Nature's Madness, you want to hit first before your partner does, so you're making the absolute most of that health reduction that just halves the health of whatever it's got. But Nathan is now bringing in his Incineroar, and he's got a Serena on the field here too, so he's still got some options now. Gyarados is not looking very offensive at the moment. It's been hit by a parting shot and Intimidate. I'm guessing it's probably going to want to switch out and come back in and intimidate these fresh new physical attackers that Nathan has kindly brought in for him. Tapu Fini, though, I'm really interested to see what else it's got. It's got Nature's Madness, Leftovers, definitely a supporting set. I wonder maybe we've got, say, a Heal Pulse there as well. I'm thinking maybe an Icy Wind as well. I'm really curious to see how much Carl maybe reveals later.
Well, he's not going to be revealing anything this turn as Venusaur switches out for that Tapu Fini. Gyarados going for a Lash Out, which will be boosted in power since the Pokemon, it was intimidated the last turn. I correct myself. So not going to be doing too much damage at all to that Sarina, and taking a Flare Blitz for its troubles. Carl probably correctly trying to predict the moves coming out and where they're going to be landing so he can just take super effective attacks or not very effective attacks in this case as well as he can. Solar Blade though coming out from that Sarina, really interesting move choice in the sun, and absolutely tanked by Venusaur being quad resisted, but that's a great attack to have access to when you're facing down a Tapu Fini.
Absolute 10 out of 10 star points for bringing Solar Blade on screen as well. Really appreciate seeing that. I think I only ever saw that in like the trailer for Sun and Moon or something with the Orantis using it. But now we're getting into this next turn, getting distracted here. Venusaur is definitely in range of a Flare Blitz at the moment. Gyarados is still at very low amounts of attack here. So the question is whether Venusaur maybe has an Earth Power here that could be enough for this Incineroar to go down, make of the Protective. We might see a little bit of a switch out of this Gyarados, but Incineroar is still offering a lot for Nathan at the moment, even though Carl has all four of his Pokemon.
Yeah, indeed. And a switch out is exactly what we see as Groudon comes in to replace that Gyarados onto the field. And near the end of the sun as well, so might be wanting to switch out a little bit later. Sludge Bomb, though, going into the Sarina. In fact, you've got Lurantis on got me having Lurantis on the brain. Not enough to pick up the knockout and revealing the Life Orb item. Flare Blitz does pick up the knockout onto Venusaur, get that KO, and follow up from Sarina. That Solar Blade going into Groudon's going to be doing a lot of damage, and here it is coming out. Maybe 11 out of 10 style points here as Groudon does get absolutely demolished by that Solar Blade. Not even a critical hit from that Sarina, and Nathan takes 2 KOs in one turn.
Wow, what a ton of events here, Ben. Yeah. Just as the sun goes, Nathan gets off that really crucial Solar Blade. I don't think Carl was maybe expecting that amount of damage output actually from Nathan's, and he just gets out his Gyarados, he wants to switch it back in, get some more Intimidates rolling, but his restricted absolutely just gets demolished, just how Nathan's did as well. So it's really battle of the support cast here at the moment, where
it really is.
Yeah, however, although there is no grassy terrain at the moment to boost Nathan's Sarina more, it's intimidated. The sun's gone, so it's got no more Solar Blades that it can use. Unless it does want to go for that charge turn. So I'm guessing Nathan may want to go for a switch out at some point to kind of reset that Intimidates, because otherwise you're not doing too much to Tapu Fini, and you really want to be able to deal with that. So Incineroar has a better time. But with 2 water types at the moment, Incineroar has kind of done its job on this team, and it's going to be down to what Nathan has in the back to be able to deal with it, as we do see a little cheeky peek here. It is the Tapu Fini. So it's not got an amazing matchup into the opposing water types, but it's also not terrible. But it's going to be probably down to the Sarina as to how much damage it can do. But at so low amount of health, it may be a little too late, even though he is up in terms of Pokemon numbers.
Indeed, and that Incineroar just resetting that Intimidate, coming out for the Tapu Fini. As you mentioned there, David, Tapu Fini not likely to be doing quite as much, but definitely a good Pokemon to sponge some attacks. Icy Wind coming out from Tapu Fini on Carl's end is enough to pick up the KO on that Sarina. Wasn't quite sure about that when the move came out, but Sarina does leave the field, which is a great result for Carl as Waterfall lands into that Tapu Fini. Doesn't do too much damage, and we're going to have the Incineroar switching back in for Nathan here, going down to 2 Pokemon each, and both Incineroar and Tapu Fini are probably going to struggle a little bit to do too much damage to Carl's Tapu Fini and Gyarados.
I agree. Nathan does bring in Incineroar though, so he is able to get an Intimidate on Gyarados, which is nice. He's got a Fake Out for this turn too, and I'm interested to see what the movesets of Carl's Pokemon are, and it's something Nathan's going to get a little bit more information on as well, I think, going into this following turn, because we've seen on Gyarados it's got the Waterfall, it's got the Power Whip, it's got the Lash Out. I'm wondering whether that may be an Assault Vest set, so maybe a 4th attack somewhere along the line. So it could be quite a safe Fake Out target here, especially because you might want to cover that Power Whip slot that is going to do a lot of damage back to your own Tapu Fini. And maybe we could see a Carmine on Nathan's end, or at least something to kind of damage into that Tapu Fini, because it may be down to a few misses at the moment, say from a muddy water. But it's definitely an information game, because especially in the mirror, you kind of want to know whose Tapu Fini is maybe a little bit faster than the other, and it can make a huge difference going to following games.
Certainly can, and Fake Out does indeed go into the Gyarados. Heal Pulse coming out from Tapu Fini on Carl's side of the field, so going to bring that back up to full health, and that's going to be pretty important, really, as a Moonblast comes out into that Gyarados, and not going to do too much at all. In fact, less than 25%, and I'd say that makes it so that the Tapu Fini on Carl's side of the field is just going to be able to keep that Gyarados really healthy forever, because Incineroar isn't likely to be able to do lots and lots of damage to this Gyarados, and it has to do it under risk of Waterfalls and Nature's Madness, and we know that there could be a little bit of a combo attack coming up here. Nature's Madness followed by Waterfall coming out from that Gyarados, so then you're in a position where it's Tapu Fini versus the world.
Yeah, and there's the Haze reveal as well, so all those boosts that Nathan works, or those drops that Nathan's worked so hard to get on this Gyarados are now just absolutely gone. So Gyarados is able to get a huge waterfall off into the Incineroar, get that KO. Wasn't offering a lot anyway, but it just kind of helps seal up this game for Carl, it looks like, because I don't think Nathan's Tapu Fini is going to be able to out-damage the Heal Pulse support that Carl has on his Tapu Fini either. And it also doesn't seem to have any health recovery, whereas Carl has leftovers on his as on top of that. So whereas Carl has like infinite healing for the rest of the game, Nathan, even if he has a berry, it's only a limited amount. So it does look like Carl very much has this game won here.
Certainly, good information there for Carl as well. After the Icy Wind drop from previous turns, Nathan's Tapu Fini was at reduced speed, but after the Haze, we see that the Heal Pulse goes off first on Tapu Fini on Carl's side of the field. So Gyarados getting all of its health back, launching out a Power Whip, does miss this time, so no critical hit Power Whip on Carl's side of the field this time. As Tapu Fini on Nathan's side does go for an Icy Winds, drop the speed of Carl's Pokemon, will be able to go first, but very unlikely to out damage this Heal Pulse.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're going to need multiple critical hits at the moment, as Nature's Madness comes out from Carl's end, hitting on to Nathan's Tapu Fini, doing a little under half of its health damage, thanks because it's already taken a little bit of chip. Citrus Berry is the reveal though for Nathan's end, and as we've seen, Nathan's kind of already revealed a lot of his moves already, so he might as well kind of fish for a bit more maybe a few more damage calcs. And it's interesting to know he does live that huge Power Whip attack even from this unintimidated Gyarados now, so that also might be useful for going into following games. So but Nathan's, still targeting down this Gyarados, it looks like, as well. Whereas I think you probably need to be targeting this Tapu Fini if you would be able to kind of break the cycle. So I think even with Intimidates, thanks to this Assault Vest and this Gyarados, which it likely is, it's not doing a whole lot.
No, not doing a whole lot at all. Moonblast does go into the Gyarados, brings it to about 50% of its health, but Icy Wind from the Tapu Fini is enough to knock out Tapu Fini on Nathan's side of the field, and that will be game one to Carl of the United States.
It sure will. And a well-fought game as well. It was interesting to see in this Groudon Mirror how the difference of the supporting cast made such a key turn of events for both players. Like, we had the Solar Blade on the Serena on Nathan's end, which ended up being so crucial to getting a huge knockout. But also the kind of the grass coverage on the Gyarados being really crucial to knock out Nathan's Groudon. So both players have obviously prepped the matchup quite a bit, because Groudon is now quite a popular restricted to be running, so you do need to have answers for the mirror, because you're dealing a lot of damage to each other, but it's a bit dangerous to have your own Groudon versus another Groudon, because you don't know who's going to be faster, you don't know who's going to be stronger. So it'd be interesting to see this game too. I think there's going to be a lot of, maybe not a lot of switch ups, but a lot of more techs and a lot of interesting plays revealed. Yeah,
and I'm hoping we see a little bit more of the supporting cast from Nathan's do a little bit more in that early game, because that substitute go up, and once the Venusaur was removed, it kind of felt like a bit of a better game there for Nathan's side of the field. He managed to get some traction, and then Carl had the tools that he needed to be able to come back and just keep the pressure on the field. It was okay that he got two Pokemon knocked out, because he'd already done enough with that Gyarados and its Power Whip, and certainly that grass coverage is going to be making a big impact. Of course, we did also see the item reveal on the Venusaur on Carl's side of the field, and that being Life Orb does make a big difference, because it doesn't really matter how defensively your Groudon has been trained. A Life Orb Grass Knot is still going to be enough to pick up KOs. It's going to do a lot of damage to Tapu Fini. It's going to do a lot of damage to Stakataka. We saw it do quite a bit of damage, but Serena able to survive the attack, and so you've got to find a way, I think, if you're a Nathan, to really get around that Venusaur early. And if you can do that, maybe position the Groudon in onto the field to do some damage to Carl's side of the field, and maybe try and find a way to get through that Gyarados, which is quite a difficult type for Nathan to be able to damage effectively.
It is, yeah. No electric type attacks, and maybe only the rock type on the Stakataka here, which is also just weak to the Gyarados, especially if we've got an Earthquake as its fourth move here. But interestingly, on Carl's end, he's actually got like hardly any priority moves. Maybe only the Shadow Sneak on Mimikyu, possibly. So like Serena's Queenie Majesty is completely useless here. So as a grass type, that's really what you want to be making the most of. And Nathan's still been bringing it. So whereas maybe in this matchup at the moment, because there's no like fake out or like prankster moves here, Rillaboom may be something that's actually would have been like a nicer pick, for instance. But we have seen that Solar Blade do a huge amount of damage off like quite a big attack stat too. But anyway, let's get into this game two here. Let's see how maybe some of these switch ups of these leads end up happening.
Yeah, we'll see that right now with Tapu Fini and Groudon being the lead of choice for Carl here. Switching it up from last game, and Groudon and Incineroar, no switch there for Nathan, deciding that he's going to stick with the same moves. And Groudon being up on the field, we'll see what the item is potentially, because we didn't really see anything from that Groudon in the last game on Carl's side, being knocked out straight away from the Solar Blade. A couple of effects on the field. Intimidate coming out from Incineroar, dropping the attack of Groudon on Carl's side of the field, and Misty Terrain coming up from Tapu Fini.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information actually revealed right there already. So that we know there's no White Herb on Carl's end, for instance. Maybe a Life Orb of it. We know the Venusaur's got the Life Orb, so Groudon's probably got something else up its sleeve that we have not yet seen. And interestingly, even though Carl has more of a slower-oriented team, he's got no, like, say, tailwind offense that maybe Nathan's Whimsicott has. He's actually got a faster Groudon, naturally, or at least a speed tie anyway. And as well, you want your Tapu Fini to be faster than your Groudon type 2, so you get heal pulses off quite quickly, and more importantly, get those Nature's Madness off first too. So neither of these Groudons are max speed, that's for sure. But Nathan's definitely, even though he's got the fake out, he could be on the back foot.
Certainly could be, and fake out is exactly what we see early doors. Going into that Tapu Fini, Groudon going for a Swords Dance on Carl's side of the field, so content to set it up really early and just get himself ready to launch some big attacks into Nathan's side of the field. Precipice Blades does come out from Groudon on Nathan's side of the field, hits both targets and does a lot of damage to Tapu Fini on Carl's side of the field, taking it down to less than half, even with the leftovers recovery.
Yeah, and there's the disadvantage, actually, of not being Citrus Berry, for instance, because now you're still in range of a Precipice Blades on Nathan's end, whereas with Citrus Berry would take you out of that. So Groudon's now at +1 attack on Carl's end, so it's looking pretty scary, and Incineroar is almost definitely in range of one of those Precipice Blades. So Nathan's going to be wanting to potentially pivot out of that situation at the moment, and Nathan also knows that is going Groudon slower too, so he's not even able to try and pick off Carl's Groudon before it even moves, and even if there was any doubt, Carl maybe even have Icy Wind on his own Tapu Fini to cover for that.
Exactly, as Incineroar does go for the switch out, bringing in Serena to maybe try and resist that Precipice Blades possibly coming out from Carl's side of the field. Groudon going for a protect on Nathan's side, so making sure that he has the full opportunity to not take as much damage as he can. Tapu Fini, though, gets a heal pulse onto that Groudon, so it's at one stage of increased attack and able to launch out Precipice Blades into the field at full health. Serena takes that pretty well, though, does just less than half damage, and Tapu Fini's getting ever closer to being able to survive another Precipice Blades from Groudon on Nathan's side of the field.
Yeah, Groudon's a strong Pokemon, so Serena does take that pretty well, considering it's +1 Precipice Blades. However, it's still probably, though, in range of, say, a Heat Crash at this point, because Serena's naturally slower. I imagine the Groudon's probably faster on Carl's end as well. So it's still a tricky situation, and Nathan's own Groudon's in this kind of the same position as it was last turn. Carl's had an excellent lead at the moment. Groudon's now back to full health. It's at more attack than it was at the start of the game, and Tapu Fini's slowly recovering on its own too. Imagine we might see maybe a pivot of an instant back in for Nathan here, especially if it's in the Incineroar slot and you predict a Heat Crash into that slot. It's a very nice pivot in there. You take the Heat Crash quite well, Intimidate, fake out for the next turn. However, Carl obviously knows that's an option, so but we do see a little switch out here into the Gyarados.
Yeah, Gyarados coming in here, getting Intimidate. A nice Intimidate onto Serena, but won't be affecting that Groudon on Nathan's side of the field because of that White Herb that we saw in Game 1 activating and returning its stats back to normal. Serena does indeed pivot out to that Incineroar, as you mentioned there, David. Gets that Intimidate off, but if Carl has opted for a Precipice Blades into that slot, the Incineroar is going to be taking a lot of damage, potentially even getting knocked out by a Precipice Blades. But no, Heat Crash, exactly as you said would happen. Incineroar does take that, but not as well as it would probably like to, as Precipice Blades comes out from the Groudon on Nathan's side of the field and does about 35% to that Groudon and takes it to where it was at the end of turn 1.
Yeah, as you said, it takes it to exactly where it was, which is not a whole lot of damage actually. And Groudon is, as long as it hits its Precipice Blades on Carl's end, it still offers so much offense at the moment. However, Nathan is given a little bit of room to maneuver here thanks to the fake out. And as we've seen, Nathan does have that substitute option, which is actually a great option for him. Now, we did see this Gyarados in Game 1 get a nice little critical hit on that power whip. We don't know if that actually matched or not, as it had already kind of taken damage from its own substitute. But Groudon being such a bulky Pokemon, I do wonder whether it would have actually lived that hit. But we are going to find out potentially in this coming turn here if Gyarados does decide to go for it. But no, we just see a straight switch right back out.
Yeah, and into Tapu Fini, bringing that in again, and Groudon going for the protect on Carl's side of the field this time. So playing a little bit defensively, Incineroar going for a fake out into that slot, so no damage on Groudon this turn as that substitute goes back up. But as we know from the previous game, that Tapu Fini can break that with a Nature's Madness. And Tapu Fini, again, taking a little bite of its leftovers and recovering to a range that it probably is now quite comfortably going to survive Precipice Blades from Groudon on Nathan's side.
Yeah, so even when I said about the Citrus Berry versus the leftovers, it's now back at the health it was anyway. So, but Incineroar switches straight back out into Sphera, potentially to catch another Precipice Blades.
It does indeed, and Nature's Madness comes out from the Tapu Fini onto that Groudon, going to break that substitute, doing quite a bit of damage. We'll see a Precipice Blades follow up from the Groudon, but Groudon on Nathan's side does avoid that Precipice Blade. So Serena is the only Pokemon to take damage that turn, as Groudon on Nathan's side does opt to go for another Precipice Blades and activates the Citrus Berry on the Groudon on Carl's side of the field, so recovering up to 50% of his health as the sunlight fades. So no Solar Blade left for that Serena to go for.
Yeah, so Sun does actually now fade, as both these Groudons have been on the field for the entire match so far. But Groudon being that Citrus Berry is really crucial for like Carl here, because now it's potentially out of range of yet another Precipice Blades from Nathan's Groudon. And it was a nice play from the earlier turns to kind of get up that substitute, because Gyarados wasn't able to switch in and intimidate you, but your White Herb's consumed already from its previous switch in. Gyarados can now switch in yet again and lower the attack even further of both these physical attackers that Nathan has. So I think it's a fairly safe play, especially as you're not even risking the Nature's Madness 10% miss chance that it does have. And Groudon's in a particularly nice position to dish out another Precipice Blades. Kasuna might live that at this point, especially with another Incineroar switch in, but it's just consistent damage on the board at this point.
Indeed, and Tapu Fini going for an Icy Wind here. No switch outs, no protects coming out from Nathan's side of the field. does fairly good damage to Sarina, probably puts it in range of some other attacks from this Groudon, and Groudon going for a Precipice Blades, hitting the mark on both targets this time, taking out the Sarina. That's a really big knockout there, as Groudon goes down to about a quarter of its health and replies back with a Precipice Blades. Not enough to pick up the KO on Groudon, but Tapu Fini is going to be leaving the field and not going to be there for until the end of the game in this match. So both Nathan and Carl 3-3, but Carl having the slight advantage, having his Groudon faster than Nathan's Groudon, and of course having that Gyarados that just switched in, dropping now the attack of both Groudon and Incineroar, as Incineroar is dropping the attack of both Groudon and the Gyarados.
So again, Carl's supportive casts are just coming in right at the right times at the moment. So you've got the faster Intimidate, the faster water type into both these ground types, which don't have the sun up anymore either. So Gyarados is in a really commanding position at the moment. However, Nathan, again, he does get to buy a little bit with that fake out at the moment. But as we've seen, that this Groudon's been on Carl's and it's been on the field for so long. Like it's taken a heal pulse and a citrus berry, so it's healed up 75% of its total health at the moment. So
yeah.
Almost like Nathan's had to kill like 2 Groudons to try and get ahead, and it's still sticking around, and it's still got the speed control it wants. It can go for a protect here, save itself from the fake out, because there's no threat of a speed control on Nathan's end at the moment.
No, not at all. And Groudon does switch out into that stack attacker. So if Carl's gone for that Precipice Blades into both of Nathan's side of the field, it's going to be doing a lot of damage. Both targets hit the mark, but do actually manage to hold on, and it is going to be a berry that Incineroar is munching on. It's going to be that Aguave berry, and recovering 50% of its health. Gyarados following up the Power Whip. 2 inaccurate moves coming out from Carl here, and both hitting. There's a critical hit from that Power Whip yet again. Didn't think I'd see 2 of those in one match. Incineroar, though, going for a parting shot into that Gyarados. Going to be switching back into the Groudon on his side of the field and bringing that Incineroar right back in for another Intimidate.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I think Nathan maybe goes for a read there, predicts Carl to go for the protect and try and really make the most of that, and maybe go for a party shot to the Gyarados, like get your stack attacker in nice and safely so you can bring Incineroar yet again and intimidate the Groudon so you can get up maybe a triple with your stack attacker. But Carl plays it very nicely and plays it safely too. He's already up. He doesn't want to full feint to like a protect and then exactly what Nathan was predicting. So Carl does not let Nathan get away with that and gets a massive KO on a stack attacker, and Nathan's down to his last 2 Pokemon, and Carl's Gyarados can just switch out, switch in, further intimidates, and even just do a lot of damage as well with its own water type and ground moves into Nathan's Pokemon that definitely do not want to be facing at the moment, because your main damage output, I think, from Nathan's end is maybe a throat chop into the Gyarados at this point. So Gyarados being the really key MVP at the moment for Carl.
Definitely is, and yeah, you're absolutely right. That Gyarados switching out and switching back in is almost certain to see what happen. It's certainly what we'll see happen. Actually, the Groudon does switch out for Carl into that stack attacker. It looks like the Gyarados on Carl's side of the field is just happy to start going for attacks as it launches a Power Whip into the Groudon. Fake out going into the wrong slot there from Nathan's side of the field into the now stack attacker. We see Precipice Blades coming out from Groudon, doesn't hit its mark, and that stack attacker does stay on the field. And yeah, we see Nathan lock in the 4th hit there. Kind of knows that there's nothing really left once your Groudon misses a Precipice Blades on one of the only targets left for you to target down. So yeah, really well played match there by Carl, and just, you know, in that Groudon mirror, the supporting cast is so important. And it really was on Carl's side of the field. Both Gyarados and that Venusaur was so pivotal for him to be able to just have that offensive pressure. And of course, that combined with having the faster Groudon and the faster Tapu Fini makes it really, really hard, certainly from Nathan's perspective, to get any traction whatsoever, because every time you want to do something, you have to take an attack for your troubles.
You do. So there's not really much more to say. On top of that, Ben, like the Gyarados was just so crucial in that matchup. And like interestingly, the Venusaur was the thing that we mainly highlighted in the team preview as being the main thing is it could hit so much for super effective, probably one-shot the Groudons, but it turned out like the Pokemon that you really want is something that, and especially that makes up a really good core, is that something you could switch in and also have some sort of effect on that top of that, whether it's resisting the hit that you want it to, offering that Intimidate, and into a Groudon matchup is absolutely perfect there. So Carl Shotsberger is able to take the USA to 5-0, I believe, versus Guatemala and take the win as well, which is huge for them. So especially after having drawn last week with Ireland, that puts them in a really strong position in the group to probably go through to the next stage even. And unfortunately for Guatemala, that means they have lost both of their matches, so they are probably out. But nothing to shake a stick at. Their team has been absolutely amazing, and especially being top of their group from the qualifiers as well. So well played to both players.
Yeah, certainly. And, it's just a really bit of a luck of the draw sometimes, but the US is a very difficult team to play up against. They've got so many good players. We'll have to see what the rest of the week brings, but for now, we're going to be going to a short break, and we'll be back with a match between Spain and South Korea.